Welcome back to the Horror Hub. Let's jump right into the story. Once upon a time, there was a man named John. John was a solitary man who loved nothing more than to lose himself in a good book. He had always been drawn to mystery and thriller novels, relishing the sense of unease they gave him. One evening, as he was browsing through the shelves of his local bookstore, he came across a novel that caught his eye. It was called The Killer Within. The cover was simple, featuring only the title in bold, black letters. But as John picked up the book and read the blurb on the back, he felt a chill run down his spine. The novel followed the story of a man who lived a solitary life, much like John, and who found himself embroiled in a series of murders. John dismissed the similarities between the protagonist of the novel and himself as mere coincidence. He purchased the book and took it home, eager to start reading. As he began to delve into the story, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The more he read, the more convinced he became that the novel was not just fiction, but a warning of things to come. The protagonist, whose name was also John, lived alone in a small, rundown apartment in a secluded part of the city. Just like John, the protagonist had always been drawn to mystery and thriller novels, relishing the sense of unease they gave him. But as the story progressed, the protagonist began to notice that the events of the novels he was reading seemed to mirror his own life. The murders in the novel were brutal, with the victims being killed in a similar fashion, leading the protagonist to suspect that the killer may be someone close to him. And as the protagonist delved deeper into the murders, he began to notice strange occurrences in his own life. Objects in his apartment would be moved, and he would wake up in the middle of the night to find someone standing at the foot of his bed. John couldn't shake off the feeling that the story was not fiction, but a warning of things to come. He tried to go about his daily life, but he couldn't focus on anything. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, expecting the killer from the book to come after him. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat, and he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was in danger. As the days passed, John's fear turned into obsession. He was convinced that the killer was real and that he was the next target. He began to investigate the murders described in the book, trying to find some proof that the killer was real. He visited the crime scenes, talked to the detectives in charge of the case, and even went as far as to hire a private investigator to follow him. But as John delved deeper into the murders, he began to notice more and more similarities between the protagonist of the novel and himself. He started to doubt his own sanity, and he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was losing control. One evening, as John was poring over the details of the murders, he received a phone call. The voice on the other end was familiar, but John couldn't quite place it. "John," the voice said, "I'm coming for you." John's heart stopped. He knew that the killer had found him. He tried to run, but his legs felt like lead. He could hear the killer getting closer, his footsteps echoing through the empty streets. Just as the killer was about to grab him, John woke up. It had all been a dream, or so he thought. But as he looked down at his hands, he saw that they were covered in blood. He couldn't remember what had happened, but he knew that he had killed someone. John was in shock. He couldn't believe that he had killed someone. He didn't remember anything about the night of the murder, and he couldn't shake off the feeling that the killer from the book was real. He was certain that he had been set up, but he couldn't prove it. John was arrested and put on trial for the murder, but he couldn't remember anything about the night of the murder. All he could remember was the novel and the feeling that the killer was real. As the trial progressed, John's attorney suggested that he had dissociative amnesia, and that the book may have been used as a tool to trigger his memories. But the prosecution argued that it was all in John's mind, and that he had killed the victim willingly. The trial was intense, and the evidence against John was overwhelming. His fingerprints and DNA were found at the crime scene, and the victim's blood was found on his clothes. But John was convinced that the killer from the book was real, and that he had been set up. As the trial came to a close, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty. John was sentenced to life in prison, haunted by the knowledge that he was truly the killer within. But even in prison, John couldn't shake off the feeling that the killer from the book was real. He spent his days poring over the details of the novel, trying to find some proof that the killer was real. And then one day, he found it. A small detail that he had overlooked before. A detail that proved that the novel was not fiction, but a real-life account of the murders. John's attorney presented the new evidence, and it was enough to cast doubt on the original verdict. A retrial was granted, and this time with the new evidence, John was found not guilty. He was released from prison, but his life was forever changed. He had lost everything, his freedom, his reputation, and his sanity. But the real shock was yet to come. As John was trying to put his life back together, he received a letter from an unknown sender. Inside the letter was a manuscript. It was the sequel to the novel The Killer Within. The story continued where the first one left off, describing the life of John in prison, the struggles, the regrets, and the constant fear of the killer coming after him. But the most shocking part was the end of the novel, where it revealed that the author of the book was none other than the real killer, who had orchestrated the entire thing and had been the one who had set John up. The real killer had written the novel as a twisted game, a game that he had won and had left John to rot in prison for the rest of his life. John was horrified and couldn't believe that someone could be so cruel and manipulative. He spent months trying to track down the real killer, but all of his leads led to dead ends. He was filled with a constant sense of fear and paranoia, unable to trust anyone or anything. He knew that the killer was still out there and that he would come for him eventually. John's mental health began to deteriorate, and he found himself becoming more and more isolated. He couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched and followed, and he spent most of his days locked away in his apartment, too scared to leave. One day, John received a package in the mail. Inside, he found a copy of The Killer Within with a note attached. The note simply read, "You can run, but you can't hide." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and leave a like. Thanks for watching.